Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is shred. Let's take a moment to look at some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear shred used is to mean to tear or to cut into strips. You'll hear this action used sometimes in the kitchen. People might shred carrots or shred lettuce, cabbage, other vegetables in order to make certain dishes. Sometimes you'll hear it in connection to other processes where we're trying to reduce things into small strips. This first definition connects to our second one. So the second definition, to reduce a document. So think a full sheet of paper, and you're making it unreadable by cutting it into strips. And generally this is being done by kind of putting the piece of paper or pieces of paper through a machine. A third way you might hear shred used is in connection to music. And specifically, it might mean that someone is playing a really intricate and fast style of rock guitar. Okay. Now, this third definition is probably not something you hear very often. I feel like maybe in movies or TV shows, I've heard people describe a musician as being really talented, really good, and saying, "Oh my gosh, he shreds the guitar," right? So generally, it's done in a sort of complimentary manner. You should know that shred is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, first I need to double my ending consonant before I add ing. And the reason I'm doubling the consonant here is that I have a one-syllable word, shred. It has one vowel letter and it ends with consonant, vowel, consonant. And I'm adding a suffix that starts with a vowel. So that leads to me doubling the ending here. Okay, so forming the progressive, I'm going to make shredding, shredding. Okay, to make the past tense, I'm also going to have a similar process. I'm going to double the D before I add ed. Ed is another suffix that begins with a vowel letter. Okay, now as I add that ed, I'm going to add an extra syllable to the verb as I say it. It should sound like this: shredded, shredded. Okay, and I'm doing this because my base verb ended with a D sound, a voiced sound. Okay, now there aren't any additional phrasal verbs that we need to study today. So instead, let's focus on making some verbs in the imperative and the past perfect. We'll start with the imperative. You might know this as a command, where you're telling one person or two or more people to do a particular action, or maybe not to do a particular action. The imperative is unique because we do not have a stated subject. The subject is implied. It's either you singular if you're talking to one person, or you plural if you're talking to two or more people. So to begin an affirmative sentence, I'm just going to use the base verb. Okay. Now, sometimes I've had students say, "Ooh, I don't know, Katie, about saying that seems very direct just to tell somebody to do something." You can always soften an imperative sentence by using please at the beginning or please at the end. You don't need it in both places. Just one please will work. So one way you might see this verb shred used in the imperative is in the directions for a recipe. So an example of this: shred the chicken using forks while it is still hot yet cool enough to handle. Okay, so what the cooking directions are telling us to do, use forks to kind of pull apart the chicken, the meat here, so that they're kind of long, thin strips of it. Okay. Now, if I want to make a negative imperative sentence, what I'm going to do is use do, not, and then the base verb. You might also hear the contraction don't, and then the base verb. Here's an example. Don't shred last year's tax return. We need to keep them for 7 years. So here, this would tie back to that second definition of taking pieces of paper and turning them into unreadable strips. So this person is telling you, don't put your tax return, last year's tax return, through the machine. That's going to make it unreadable. Now let's talk about the past perfect. We use this verb tense in particular to note that an action happened before some other action in the past. To make the past perfect, I'm going to need two parts. I'm going to use the past form of have, which is had, and then I use my participle form of the verb. And since shred is a regular verb, I'm just using that form of the verb with the ed ending. Okay, let's take a look at an example sentence. The whistleblower claimed government aides had shredded documents ahead of the legislature's investigation. Okay, so here we have somebody, a whistleblower is somebody who's kind of reporting something bad, something illegal that has taken place. And here, this particular person is claiming or stating, maybe I saw this happen, that certain aides destroyed documents, turned them into unreadable strips. Okay. Now, if I want to make a negative past perfect sentence, I'm going to have my subject, I'm going to use had, then not, and then the participle form of the verb. You might also hear the contraction hadn't. An example here. I hadn't shredded the cabbage before I made the vinaigrette. So here, again, someone might be talking about their steps, their process for making a particular dish. Finally, let's talk about making a yes or no question in the past perfect. To do this, start with had, then you're going to have your subject, and then you're going to have your participle form of the verb. Here's another example. Had her testimony shredded the credibility of other witnesses. So sometimes this verb gets used in a way that is not literal. It's sort of figurative. So we can't see someone's credibility. Do we trust them? Do we think they're an honest person? But here, what someone else is sharing or what someone else is saying, we have to kind of picture or imagine it's like the credibility has been torn into tiny little pieces. So this is kind of another way to say something's been destroyed or ruined. Now, let's take a moment to look at some words and phrases related to our verb shred. And the first word we're just going to look at is the noun form of this word. So exact same spelling, exact same pronunciation. When I use the noun shred, I might be referring to the strip of some material that has been torn or cut from something larger. An example of this. The kids tore their pants to shreds climbing and playing. Okay. So here, we can kind of imagine, right? Maybe they've been climbing on rocks and other things, and we're getting tears and rips and things. So we can kind of visualize what was once just regular pants. Now we have sort of strips. Another way you'll hear the noun shred used is just to refer to a very small amount of something. Sometimes it's common to hear it used in a negative way. So saying there isn't a small amount of something. An example of this. There isn't a shred of evidence to convict my client. I feel like I've heard lawyers on TV shows or lawyers in movies say things to this as they're making a presentation to a jury. Another related word that you might encounter is the noun shredder. This is referring to that machine that creates those small strips of unreadable pieces of paper. An example of this. You can take the box of papers to the shredder. Many offices will have machines like this, particularly if there are many documents that have private or sensitive information on them. So it can be very responsible to use this type of machine so that someone else can't steal social security numbers and other similar private information. Another related word you might encounter is the adjective shredded. Generally, how people are going to hear this is describing something that has been torn or cut into shreds. And this word has come up with one of my students recently. I have a student who has a new job in a restaurant, and many times as people are ordering food and specifying what kind of meat they would like in a particular dish, the student, as the server, is going to ask, do you want that grilled or shredded? Okay, so I've got a picture in the bottom right-hand corner to give you kind of an idea. To me, this looks like some barbecue that has been shredded, so torn or cut into these sort of very long, thin strips of meat. Now, there's a second way you might encounter the adjective shredded, and this is, again, a very informal meaning. It can be extremely muscular. So, again, people might share something like this sentence: this workout will give you shredded abs. So abs, short for abdominal muscles. You might think of the muscles in your stomach area, that part of your body. And maybe a fitness instructor is trying to make this promise that you are going to be so muscular if you continue to do these particular workouts. The last phrase I'm going to leave you with today is in shreds. This can mean that something has been badly damaged or ruined. Okay. Now, we might be talking about a physical object when we say in shreds, but it doesn't have to be literal. So it can be something intangible, something we cannot see, like my example sentence here. His reputation was in shreds after people realized he had been lying for years. So this sentence is suggesting his reputation has been damaged or destroyed because we now know this particular individual has been lying a great deal. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.